Hi, this is Calandra. In this video, we'll cover the zero product property and solving equations by factoring. So let's start with an illustration. Suppose I tell you that the product of two numbers equals 0. What can you conclude about the numbers? So if we have two numbers, we're multiplying them together, and we get a result of 0. The only way that this can happen is that at least one must equal 0. Because 0 is the only number that when we multiply it times another number will give us 0 for an answer. This idea is exactly the zero product property. So if we have two quantities, A times B, and this product is equal to 0, then that means whatever quantity A is, it must equal 0, or whatever quantity B is must equal 0. Okay, so the key to using this property is that you have to have a product and that 0 should be on one side of the equation. So 0 is on one side of the equation. Otherwise, this doesn't make sense. So let's see how we can apply the zero product property to solve polynomial equations using factoring. So in this example, we want to solve the following equations. In part A, I have 0 on one side, and I already have a factored quadratic. So notice that we have x minus 5 times x plus 11. So that's of my form A times B from the zero product property. Well, if the product of these two things equals 0, that means either the first thing, x minus 5, must equal 0, or that second quantity, x plus 11, equals 0. Well, now we have two equations that we know how to solve. We add 5 to both sides, and we get that x equals 5 for one of our solutions. Subtracting 11 from both sides of our equation, we get x equals negative 11 for our second solution. So if we substitute either of these numbers into our original equation, we would get a true statement. It would make that expression equal 0. Okay, moving on to part B. Okay, I see I have a product of three things equal to 0. Well, it doesn't matter how many we have. If my product equals 0, that means at least one of them must be 0. So I take each of my factors and set it equal to 0. So I know x plus 1 equals 0, or x plus 2 equals 0, or x plus 10 is equal to 0. And now I solve my resulting equations. So in my first equation, we subtract 1 from both sides to get x equals negative 1. My second equation, our solution would be x equals negative 2. And in our last equation, x is equal to negative 10. And those would be our three solutions. Okay, moving on to part C. Well, in this problem, I have 0 on one side of my equation, but my expression is not factored. The zero product property only works if I have a product. So on the left, I notice that I can factor out an x, leaving me with x plus 3 in parentheses. So now I can use the zero product property. My first factor, x, is either equal to 0, or my second factor, x plus 3, is equal to 0. Well, x equals 0 is already a solution, right, because we're saying our variable can equal 0. In our second equation, we subtract 3 from both sides to get x is equal to negative 3. Okay, going on to part D. We have 0 on one side, however, we don't have a product on the left. So I need to factor this expression. So we had a method that you can follow to factor trinomials. So we can take our leading coefficient, 2, times our constant, -5, to get -10. And now I need two numbers that multiply to give me -10, but add up to be my middle coefficient of -3. So actually, 2 times -5 is going to work, because 2 plus a -5 equals the -3 that we need. Okay, so the way that we're going to use that is to rewrite our expression as 2x squared plus 2x minus 5x, because 2x minus 5x gives us that -3x, minus 5 is equal to 0. So let me just note that that came from over here. So now we do a factor by grouping. We group our first two together and our last two together. I can factor out a 2x, leaving me with an x plus 1. I can factor out a -5, leaving me with x plus 1. So now I can factor out an x plus 1, leaving me with 2x minus 5. And now I'm ready to use my zero product property, because I have a product and I have 0 on one side. So we have x plus 1 is equal to 0, or 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. So my first equation, we would end up with x equals -1. My second equation will have 2x is equal to 5, dividing both sides by 2, and we get that x is equal to 5/2. Okay, our last example, part E. We have 4x squared equals 25. Well, the first thing that we need to do is to get the 25 over to the left side of the equation, because the zero product property only works if we have 0 on one side. Okay, so 4x squared minus 25 equals 0. So this is actually a difference of two squares. I can rewrite my 4x squared as 2x, that quantity squared, minus 25 is the same thing as 5 squared. So if you remember your difference of two squares formula, the expression will factor into 2x minus 5 times 2x plus 5. So I'm going to write that off to the side in case you need to review that. So we use the difference of two squares. And now we can apply the zero product property. So 2x minus 5 equals 0, or 2x plus 5 equals 0. We get 2x is equal to 5, or x equals 5/2 is one solution. Now my second equation, 2x equals -5. Dividing by 2, we get x equals -5/2 is my second solution.